Some people are believers in the meditative and healing power of walking. Um, some people believe it is essential to their spiritual life and overall health. Um, if it's nice outside, a lot of people will often pick a direction and just walk towards that direction until their feet tell them to stop. Um, and then they find a nice place to sit. They might bring a snack with them to eat, and they might read a comic book or whatever the fuck they like to do. Now, given the state of the world, sometimes their legs and body feel so full of energy and anxiety that they feel compelled to walk. Now, in those moments, whatever the time of day may be, that people walk until they're exhausted and their mind hits a reset mode. And when people walk and leave, the people's mind open up to the possibilities that you could literally almost catch what they call a great idea. And those moments are called rare gifts of perfect clarity. And one of the best types of walks are the ones where people are energized, they're almost manic, and they need to talk with or yell about the fates. And people call them their Bobby D Holy Ghost moments. It's a tribute to it's a tribute to an actor, Robert Duvall, and his performance in The Apostle. If it's drizzling, cold, and cloudy outside, people might put on a waxed field coat, a woolly sweater, and a pair of brown leather boots that might have a hole in them. And Chauncey De Vega, who wrote this article, says that he he said that he wrote he had worn a hole through the sole of one of those boots. Now Chauncey De Vega patched it with shoe goop, and he walked and sometimes people will walk in puddles to test the seal of the shoe. And for some reason that makes people smile. And people don't we don't need to know why, but sometimes we should just test and nurture the inner child that lives in us. And where he lives at, there was a graveyard down the street from where he lives, and he will find great peace walking there as a child. But as when he grew up, he was afraid of zombies and ghosts. But as an adult, we fucking know better. The dead can't hurt you, but it's the living that we must worry about. During one of his graveyard walks years ago, he happened upon a tombstone of one of his ancestors. He truly believed that he wanted the ancestor to find him, and he was buried right next to one of the rolling sons of the Gilded Age. And basically, as he laughed aloud, he was likely a black man who passed for white, buried right next to a rich white man who believed himself to be a master of the universe. And I basically wonder who got the last laugh. But also during his graveyard walk, he had been thinking a great deal about America and its democracy crisis and the poisons of fascism and white supremacy that are literally killing this fucking country. I keep visualizing a tombstone with an inscription warning passersby, passersby that most Americans didn't even fight for democracy while it was dying, but they went on with life as usual. And those who tried to warn them about the impending disaster just got tired and they fucking gave up. That is effectively happening right now in real time. A recent article in the Washington Post issued a warning. January 6th committee faces a thorny challenge. Persuading, basically, they've been trying to persuade the public to care. Apparently, the House committee investigating the Capitol attack of January 2021 has tried to recruit high-profile journalists to write a report for it, hoping to build a narrative thriller that compels audience and is a departure from government reports of yore. The committee staffers also hope to put tougher to put together the blockbuster televised hearings that the public actually tunes into, which is a troubling way to frame a historic congressional investigation. But the apparent challenge is to make the public care about an event that happened more than a year ago, and that many Americans feel that they already understand. The committee wants to turn hundreds of thousands of pages of depositions, records, and other evidence into an accessible narrative that's aimed at hard to reach and deeply polarized audiences. Now, one unnamed committee member told the Post that there's one third of the nation that will read it, one third that might read it, and one third that won't believe it, and it's more from the report. The committee is also competing for attention amid a fury of current events that now concludes the war in Ukraine, the raising stakes for the committee's ability to hold the public's attention at the Klan insurrection, and as the Klan insurrection moves further and further back from the public memory. Don Ritchie, who's an historian emeritus of the Senate, said that the most important thing for any congressional committee is publicity. Investigators need a certain sense of showmanship, They need to demonstrate and dramatize what's happening because the public is distracted. After getting the publicity, then it's figuring out what you're really actually going to do about that fucking problem. And all this is a damning indictment of the current state of American democracy and political culture. This Donald Trump's regime and his coup cabal attempted to nullify the results of the 2020 presidential election. His sycophants launched a violent, lethal assault in the Capitol, and the Republican fascist Jim Crow attacks on multiracial democracy are escalating. The United States faces the possibility of a low-level civil war or sustained right-wing insurgency, and yet the American people must be entertained with the spectacle in order to fucking care. As sociologist Neil Postman famously warned in the title of his best-known work, the American people have amused themselves to death through a culture of anti-intellectualism and the superficial immediate gratification of mass media. The collective narcissism is a major public health problem. So many people, because of loneliness, alienation, and social atomization, and a culture of hyper-individualism and self-centeredness, they basically feel no sense of linked fate with other human beings outside their families and immediate social circles. Now, America's educational system has been gutted through decades of active neglect and the right-wing malice. Courses that teach critical thinking and civics have been systematically removed from the curriculum of public education. As detailed by Lisa Dugan in her excellent book, The Twilight of Equality, the social sciences and the arts and humanities are being targeted for evisceration by these same right-wing gangster capitalists at the college and university level as well. Now, education is the best way, and perhaps the only way, to create responsible, informed citizens who have the capacity and willingness to participate in a healthy democracy. Now, the global right is trying to destroy high-quality public and private education for that reason, with the ultimate goal of creating passive citizens and what we call corporate drones. The extreme outcome and wealth inequality and wage stagnation also undermine citizens' ability to be active participants in a democratic society. When people have to work multiple jobs in order to scrape out a living, they are far less willing or able to find the energy to care about democracy, let alone to turn those feelings and concerns into action. And more than half of all Americans read below a sixth grade level, which a lot of the Trump supporters do, which means that they are not able to properly understand complex matters of politics and public policy as of today. Now, the unions and other institutions of civil society, sometimes called the laboratories of democracy, have been systematically weakened by the American Republican side, and those are or were places where people learn the skills necessary to the practice of democracy. In this climate, it is no surprise that America's governing institutions are experiencing a legitimacy crisis. Now, the public largely views their elected officials and the organs of state as responsive to their needs and desires, and for good reason. Now, public opinion research has repeatedly shown that elected officials at the federal level, which is Congress, they are highly unresponsive to the policy demands of the average American, and instead they are beholden to the richest individuals and the most powerful corporations. It is true that Republicans are far worse in this regard, but Democrats by no means are immune. Basically, especially they're especially not the self-styled moderates or centrists that we think they are. But by email, people had asked about the culture critic and education scholar Henry A. Giroux. He's the author of numerous books and he's a contributor to Salon. And basically, we asked for his thoughts on this problem. And basically, why don't Americans seem to care about democracy? He did offer a lengthy response, which we will quote in part. Democracy is in exile in the United States, and the political, social, and educational breakdown is intensifying. He started observing this back in the 1980s when the rise of the neoliberal predatory capitalism it became a 1980s, and it marked a turning point. And not only did the culture shift to a market-based language that undermined any sense of the common good, shared values, and trust, but embraced a language of privatization, deregulation, and commodification that commercialized all social relations and retreated from any discourse that evoked matters of ethics, social responsibility, and the obligations of citizenship. In the current movement, the fucking Republican Party and its allies among the financial elite, corrupt politicians, and right-wing movements, they hold democracy in contempt because it poses a threat to the unchecked accumulation of capital, white nationalism, white supremacy, and an emerging fascist politics. But in an age when economic activity is diverse from all from all social cost and all matters of truth, justice, and solidarity become the object of scorn. Democracy in the formative educational culture that legitimizes it and withers along with the ideals and institutions that sustain it. At a time when all vestiges of critical thought are being purged from public schools, women's reproductive rights are under attack, and tyranny translates into increasing levels of violence. The collapse of conscious social responsibility and justice proceed at an alarming pace. Now faced with these forces of conformity, anti-intellectualism, and authoritarianism, um, Giroux continued, ordinary people tend to lose their capacity to think critically and act responsibly. Critical modes of agency wither, opening a space for both oppressive forms of education and the tyrants that benefit from them. The public imagination succumbs to lies, conspiracy theories, and the cult of a strongman. Now, under such circumstances, the commanding visions of democracy have not only disappeared, but they have given way to the tyrannical nightmare of an authoritarian future. It's a little to fucking wonder that a lot of people, many people no longer care and are willing to fight for a democratic society. Now, Giroux is not suggesting that we need some perfect society or of a philosopher killing of a philosopher kings to save American democracy from the fascist movement. But if the American people remain poorly informed and largely disengaged, the real life problems caused are exemplified by a failing democracy will become much worse, creating a toxic feedback loop. There is no democracy without a knowledge public, and no justice without a language critical of injustice, Giroux wrote. And democracy should be a way of thinking about a civic culture and the development of robust public imagination. Now, how can we get here? Now, Giroux writes of the need to embrace a radical notion of democracy, but America is a long way from any such vision at this moment. Now, partly this is a work of collective imagining. Now, Giroux sees an urgent need for more individuals, institutions, and social movements to come together in the belief that the current regimes of tyranny can be resisted. Now, the alternative future are possible, and that acting on these beliefs through collective resistance will make a radical change happen. The defense of a democracy can no longer be viewed as a longer simply a demand. It has become an urgent necessity. In 2014, social psychologists conducted a famous experiment designed to examine the relationship between the human mind, boredom, and cognition. The college students were asked to sit in a room in silence for 15 minutes, alone with their own thoughts, and some were told to think about whatever they wanted, while others were given specific prompts in advance. Now, in one iteration of the experiment, participants could choose to give themselves electric shocks as a distraction, but the Science magazine reported the results. In the free thinking and planned prompt scenarios, about 50% of people did not like the experience, reporting an enjoyment level at or below the midpoint of the scale, and to see if a challenge of scenery could help. The team would let participants do the studies in their own homes, but they still found similar results. Overall, the subjects said that they enjoyed active activities like reading and listening to music about twice as much as just thinking about something. The researchers then decided to take the experiment a step further. For 15 minutes, the team left participants alone in a lab room in which they could push a button and shock themselves if they wanted to. And the results were fucking startling. But even though all participants had previously stated that they would pay money to avoid being shocked with electricity, 67% of the men and 25% of the women chose to inflict it on themselves rather than to just sit there quietly and think. And we went into this thinking it wouldn't be that bad or hard for people to entertain themselves, Wilson said. But we have this huge brain, and it's stuffed full of pleasant memories, and we have the ability to construct fantasies and stories. And we really thought that thinking time was something that people would like to do, and they really didn't. And when I first read about this research, we asked people, and there was a friend who teaches at a small regional college, if this resonated with any experiences that she had in her classroom. And she said that her students often complain that she makes them think too much during class about current events, which hurts their brain. But unfortunately, these are not isolated examples. Most people in America do not want to think about the crisis of democracy and what they can do to stop it. But even more troubling and dangerous, many Americans are attracted to fascism and other anti-human philosophies and behavior precisely because they're so desperate for a life of meaning in a world that can often feel devoid of it. Now, America's democracy crisis is a deep cultural phenomenon, which is admittedly difficult to confront directly, but by denying it, ignoring it, or simply pretending that the crisis is not fucking real will not fucking save anyone. And that will only lead us back to the words of a lamentation that I imagine will be inscribed in America's democracy's own fucking tombstone. Now, if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of my YouTube channel, to help further support the work. And I hope you guys enjoyed.